How's everybody doing today? Really? How is everybody doing today? See, you're at least awake, and that's my goal. So what I'm going to try to do is offer a few points for you to, like, takeaways, things to learn from. But the goal is, again, stay awake. And also hydrate. I know you just spent the last hour or so doing exercises. You climbed up a big mountain. You're going to have depleted hydration, so please make sure you're drinking water. And I want to watch bottles going up and down. So it is fantastic to be here at the National Jamboree. Super excited, humbled to be part of the spread of speakers that are going to talk to all of you over the course of the next 10 days. Again, my name is Eric Traupe. Just so much to talk about today in a compressed amount of time. I'm going to try to do about 30 minutes talking and then another 10 or so with question and answer. So the focus for us today is going to be leadership. Okay, what it is, what it isn't, how team building fits into the evolution of team dynamics, and then those takeaways that I talked about of things I want to offer for you for your own leadership journey. So you might be thinking, what exactly is leadership? Anybody know? Bark out one answer. What's leadership? Anyone? I know you're not shy.
The ability and responsibility to guide others towards a common goal.
Did you see my notes?
I'm on C-staff.
Okay. All right, she cheated a little bit, but no. So here's the deal. It is, in Webster's dictionary, and this sounds really bookish, is to the skills used by a leader to guide and direct a group towards a common goal. Now, it sounds a little schoolhouses, right? But that's not really what we're all about. In my experience, what happens is you start to talk about leadership in terms of lists or traits. If you do these 5 things, you're going to be a good leader. You do these 10, and at the end of it, you're going to be just remarkable, regardless of what you do. Frankly, it's not that easy. In fact, if you go Google leadership books on Amazon, there are 60,000 different titles for all different types of leadership. But what we're going to talk about today, which I think is the focus, is leadership in action. It's the doing and things that I think are most important. So my approach is to use real-world life experiences from my background, whether that was playing football at the University of Michigan in front of 100,000 fans back in the mid-1980s, or my 30-plus year career in government across the Marine Corps and in the agency, from the paramilitary ranks up through the executive level. So when it comes to things that are important to start with, you got to have this first. And it's a piece that it sort of anchors the whole conversation. Leaders must care about others and their welfare over themselves. All right? Just let that sink in. It's going to cut across the lattice work of what we're going to talk about today. So there are a few core principles that Connor Russo, by big shout out for Connor for helping set up all this, and Brenna and the rest of the crew. So I'm going to talk through these basic principles. And the first is what I call the anchor, the cornerstone of leadership, and that is it's all about the team. It is all about the team. And teams are so important because you never look throughout history. Go back 5,000, 3,000, 2,000, last year, without solid leadership, good things can't happen. No one can be successful at what they do. Now, all teams have someone that is designated as a leader, and they're responsible for getting things done. But it does not mean that they're responsible for doing everything. In fact, you hear a term called micromanagement, where that leader is trying to do every task, running around, barking out orders, hands flailing, and that's not exactly what we're looking for. Shifting to other aspects of that team, it's how do you define what needs to happen? Are you calm? Are you cool and collected as you lay things out towards the goal that you're shooting for? And then that leader is the role model. So for instance, everything that happens or fails to happen as a leader and what happens with that team, it's your responsibility. You don't get to sidestep and let all of that badness go and strike somebody else. That's just not how it works. So I'm going to start with my first story with respect to teams. So when I first showed up at Michigan to play football for then legendary coach Bo Schembechler, shout out for Bo. Bo was a taskmaster. He was really hard on us as a player. I had gone to a small school in Massachusetts where I played inside linebacker. Loved it, was very fortunate to be all conference for 3 years, all state my final year. But when I showed up to Michigan, everybody was all Americans. High school, every one of them, except me. But what we found over time is that everybody was just the same. It didn't matter what position you played, didn't matter if you were a USA Today All-American. What mattered was how we functioned as a team. So we worked out all summer. We did sprints, lifted weights, watched film of our opponents, did all those things that builds trust, resilience, and ability to get through even the hardest of times when you're losing in the fourth quarter and you have to come back. Second part that I found was that evolution of the team over time. Sometimes people would sprout out and became a starter earlier than, let's say, I did. Others would be the silent contributors who took a while for them to carve out their role to be able to know exactly how to contribute to the team. But all of us actually mattered. And at the end of that sort of period of time where we were all there, some of us were there 4, some of us were there 5 years, we were one of the most successful teams in the 1980s. Won 3 Big Ten championships, played in the Hall of Fame Bowl, 2 Rose Bowls, and a Gator Bowl. Awesome experience. So moving on to the second thing that I want to talk about, this theme, is goal setting. You've got goal setting with respect to individuals, and you've got goal setting with respect to teams. Now, they're both important, but nothing gets done, as I said earlier, without great teamwork. People just don't respond if you're not all working together. So with respect to individual goals, let's talk about this for a second. So for all of you here, you might have ones as an individual who's going to be a leader. You're focused on academics. You want to make honor roll so many semesters in a row or so many years in a row, wherever you are in school. Maybe for sports, you're really good at this one. You've already demonstrated you can get a varsity letter. I want to try this one. Totally different, never done it before, but think it would be fascinating and interesting. Maybe you want to build an app. You want to do type code. You want to do something that's out of the box. Having those goals as an individual helps you become a better leader when you're ultimately responsible for a group of people. Group goals are equally as important, and you need those when you are trying to pull together. So as an individual, you'll have sat there in your school circle and said, I need to be able to do these things and do them well. The team does the same thing, but promise me this, don't come up with 25 things, right? This team's gonna achieve 25 of these things. It has to be pretty simple. 3 to 5, maybe 7 at the outside, because what happens is people get confused. If you're gonna put it up on a board, you've got like several pieces of poster board that goes this, and people just start to forget it. And that's never super useful. So I'm gonna use another real world story. This one's pretty interesting. So I'm thinking back to the 2001, 2002 timeframe. Some of you may remember, or certainly have read about it. We had tragic events in our homeland. It was the attacks of September 11, 2001. And I remember preparing for my first helicopter ride out of Kabul, Afghanistan, as part of a CIA paramilitary team to go open up a forward base in the eastern part of the country. All I had really is my wits about me. And this is going to tie all the way back to individual and team goal setting. So as the helicopter took off, first of all, it was pitch black. And there was this rhythmic spinning of the rotors, like a bullwhip cracking. And we had to climb to about 11 or 12,000 feet to get over this particular pass to get to the eastern part of the country. Again, it was cold. My eyes were almost frozen shut with the wind coming in the crew doors. All I had for the next 3 or 4 months was whatever I could carry on my back, and we were understandably nervous. So as we landed in the helicopter landing zone, we all exited, faced outboard, ensured that we had no immediate threats, and then moved to safety. And then I will never forget this. Watching that helicopter lift off and disappear and get smaller and smaller and smaller as it went back over that mountain range. And we were alone. There were 5 of us. 5 of us. And then we had to figure out, still cold, frightened, had a job to do. And then for me, as the leader, I had to make sure my team didn't get harmed. We had to go find a safe house. We had to find out, well, which warlord should we be talking to? and then start the mission that we were there to do in the first place. So tying this back to individual goals, weeks before we ever did that, I got in a tremendous hiking shape, heavy weights on my back, going up mountains like the ones you guys just climbed, sweating, trying to get in the best physical shape as possible. Understanding the local politics in the area. If you're in those border regions, there's some dynamics that cut across those borders that aren't recognized by the locals. Could I function and use all of the high-end radios and technological equipment I was asked to bring with our team and use them? It was my responsibility that I had to know it better than everybody else so that the team could function. As a team, we set up goals for ourselves, working in the team room. We wrote them on our whiteboard. We talked about how many reports were we going to put out in a certain amount of time. Did we cross-train, and were we able to do all the things we needed to protect ourselves and protect everybody that was with us? All those things were critically important, and those missions went on for many, many years. So moving on to the, the third part is ethical decision-making. Now, leaders at all levels, I don't care if you manage a team of 4, 40, or 4,000, you're going to be faced with right versus wrong, right? With ethical decisions on what you're going to do. You will often be unpopular in doing these decisions. You're going to have to think for the team. You might have somebody who in the team is less than ethical than you are, but you're going to have to figure out how do you address that in a way that keeps the unity and the cohesion of the team together. And you have to fight the urge to want to not make the hard decision so people aren't annoyed or angry at you. Often, I talk about this a lot in other people I speak with about leadership. In the leadership role, it's often lonely. You're making decisions where people aren't going to always like, again, what you're doing. But you still have to do the right thing and work through it. Now, you ultimately realize that all these decisions, not only do they come to you, you've got to make the final one. So when you're confronted with something that doesn't fit into that nice model, you might have to weigh, is this decision going to hurt somebody? Is this decision going to trigger somebody to be angry at me? It may be all of those things, but you still have to do the right thing, because compromising your integrity and your ethics, read all the books you want about history, people will tell you doing so, the truth will ultimately come out and will not be good for you nor the team that you represent. So I'm going to use another story from my time in the Marine Corps where I was first lieutenant, so fairly still junior in the military, and I was overseeing a group of folks who were doing these small little missions to be able to prepare for a large operation. There was about 10 groups, each led by a junior lieutenant. And they were doing these reconnaissance missions where they had to collect, catalog, analyze, and then distribute information to a wider group. Well, one lieutenant's material was always done faster. It was done faster and better. And the battalion commander came to me, he says, "Hey, Eric, what's going on with this one lieutenant?" I said, "I didn't know." He goes, "Something strikes me as odd." So I went and did my own research, tried to figure out what it was, and I figured it out. He was going into a database and taking other people's work and putting his own name on top of it and switching it out, so he was always faster and it was always better and cleaner. So when they came to me, as uncomfortable it was, and this is a guy I knew well, he lived like 2 blocks from my house, and we used to hang out, our families hung out together, and they said, "Lieutenant Traupe, do you know what's going on?" And I told them the story. So he was removed from his position, was disciplined, and then ultimately left the Marine Corps for compromising his integrity. Okay, it never pays off. It just doesn't, so do the right thing. The next thing that's sort of similar, this fourth theme, is conflict resolution. Now, just like ethics, it doesn't matter what level of leader you are going to have challenges. There are going to be people who are in your team who are not going to agree. There are going to be people who are in your team who don't agree with you as the leader. They're going to say, "I can't believe that lieutenant or captain or scout leader or teacher or professor, they did that. I don't like it," and they're on a team. But ultimately, that conflict has to be resolved. And I've always found that, leaders with strong character, live with integrity and honesty, can figure out how to work through even the most difficult conflict situations. And you're the one who's responsible. You have to take that head on. You have to be the person who says, "I'm going to dive right into that issue. I'm going to collect the facts. Facts from this person and this person. Calmly, professionally, you're not playing sides. And then you're going to have to make a decision. One that's often going to involve compromise. You have to say, okay, I hear you here and here, but this is what we're going to do. And that decision ultimately is yours, and it's a final one when you make it. So, in another story, I'd just been promoted to the executive ranks in the agency, the senior level sort of general officer equivalent. And my bonus was, hey, Eric, congratulations, you're going to go run our office in Tripoli, Libya, on a very war-torn country on the northern coast of Africa. And this was about 2 years after we had a really tragic event that happened in a city named Benghazi. You may have heard about this and read about it, where a U.S. annex, an embassy complex at another building were attacked that resulted in the death of the ambassador and 3 other U.S. government personnel. And very, very tragic. So that echo from what had happened then drifted a few years. So the anxiousness of, well, how do we get back into the country in the way that we want to? And I will tell you, this was some of the most strong conflict in the interagency I have ever dealt with. I see some nodding heads in the audience. So the newly promoted guy gets told by his leadership, go work with the rest of the government and figure out what this looks like. So we had to decide, do we go into the west? Do we go into the east? Do we go into the south? And then who do we back? Do we back this former general? Do we back this person who's getting money from somebody else? What size force do we have? All the things that you can possibly imagine were hoisted sort of on my shoulders, which was, by the way, I will tell you, widely unpopular, because that's not normally a job the agency does. That's something as a group, but because nobody wanted it, they said, Eric, tag, you're it. You have to figure it out. We ultimately did, and we got back into the country where we still reside today. So staying calm, being professional, hearing people out, and then being able to take on new inputs and not feel threatened by that is critically important. So the last thing, and then we'll go to questions, is good communications. Again, it doesn't matter if you're young aspiring leaders like all of you are, or you're running a U.S. aircraft carrier, or you're an astronaut. It doesn't matter. Your ability to communicate is absolutely critical. And I found that it's often a differentiator between good leaders and maybe average leaders. Now, when I think of that, when you think of it, leaders have to be organized when it comes to, what do I want to say? And again, going back to my comment of like only having a few things, you can't have a message to your team. If I was all addressing you and you all worked for me in some capacity, I would only be up here for about 10, 15 minutes and lay out 3 to 5 things that mattered. And then I would look to the junior leaders to say, okay, ready, go and help execute and make that happen. Now, you've got to think of the structure and how it gets said, okay? Now, when you think through the communications, I find a mixture, right? So you can be talking in front of folks like this, in person. There's no better way to communicate with people than standing right in front of them. You watch their emotions. You see what they're doing. They're looking at their phone or they're not. It doesn't matter. Nothing replaces this. Now, you all remember during COVID, everything was one-dimensional. I see people shaking their heads and didn't like that time having to go to all of your classes through a one-dimensional screen. Other times it's written, whether it's email, it's a memo, it's some product that gets handed out. The same things apply, with the most important part is the right mix of style and content. So here's what I mean about style. You're going to meet another speaker here this week, General Stanley McChrystal, and they talk about his bearing, the way he stands, the way he talks, just the energy that he has. Part of that does help with your communications as a leader, but you don't have to always be that way. Sometimes the person who looks at their feet, kicks their feet back and forth, maybe rolls their eyes a bit and speaks in a more hushed tone like this, they're no less effective a leader, because I do think it takes all types to be the most effective. Now, by way of last example, I'll make this one shorter. Whether I was playing football at Michigan, or whether I was trying to prepare a paramilitary team to open up a base in a war zone, or products that I wrote myself were put directly in front of the President of the United States, or having briefed over my career, probably 4 of the last presidents that we've had on various topics, or communicating with my officers when I ran the Middle East for the agency, spread over multiple time zones in a couple of dozen locations. Every one of those things required a different understanding of the audience, structure to what I was going to say, and then a punchline. There had to be some takeaway that they ultimately said, okay, 1, Eric knows what he's talking about, and 2, here's what he's suggesting we do. He's maybe giving me, him or her, the right topic, or rather the right suggestions. So here's what I'd offer. We covered a lot in the last like 25 minutes or so, and I absolutely understand. Some of you are probably looking at me and saying, boy, that was a lot, Eric. That was a lot. But here's what I'll offer. If I'm really honest with myself, and I think back, I'll just say 40 or so years to be safe, and I think of myself in your shoes, and thinking about what I was going through. I was a nervous kid. I was anxious. I didn't always have the self-confidence to be able to know if I even could be a good leader. So I struggle with that. And you're going to go through some of that same emotions. You realize, guys, that is all, 1, natural, and it's part of the learning process. That's just what you're going to go through. Now, last 3 points, and this is, I think, encapsulates everything we talked about today, and these are my takeaways for you, is I don't care if you're going to school, doing sports, scouts, preparing for college, preparing for some technical profession, show up every single day and put in your best effort, okay? It's very easy to just sort of not want to get up in the bed in the morning to go to some swim meet or a soccer practice or go to school, but show up. And then when you're there, put in the work. Think of Tom Brady, Michael Jordan. Now, these are all sports figures, but you could enter scientists who won the Nobel Peace Prize. You could put in other people who are writer laureates or something like that. They put in the work. And it wasn't just their talent. They showed up. Michael Jordan did like 10,000 free throws a week to ensure that he made them in the game. And the last thing, and this is the hardest sometimes to hear, is you must believe in yourself. You sadly may have a friend, a parent, a coach, a teacher who says, you can't do that. You're not big enough. You know how many times I was told, you're too slow and you're not strong enough. You can't go play football at a Big Ten college. Never happened. I lettered there 3 years. I was told, yeah, you can't go do this in the military. Your eyes aren't good enough. You can't be a this or a that. It didn't stop me. And then when I joined the paramilitary ranks of the agency, they said, well, you'll probably make it to this level. Because they were sort of looked down upon when I first joined the agency before 9/11. And then everything kind of changed. All right? So as the old proverb goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step. So take yours today.